Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Author Friendship Cycle Writing Seminar. I am your host for today, TheShingPen, and today with me there are my fellow host, Nagiland
Hello.
and Mr. Sorin Studios. What's a Sorin?
Hello, everybody.
So today's subject in this seminar is gonna be about the system genre novels. As always, we're trying in the author friendship circle to help beginners authors to make the first steps on a story of the writing, and also help the ones who had already made those first steps to even improve their work. In this seminar, we're going to define what makes a novel a system-generated novel, fully or partially, and if one wants to write one, how to progress in doing that. So, how about we begin? You better pair up and prepare your minds and notes. So, first of all, what is a system novel? So, in a system novel, system genre novel, the main character is a person who becomes a character of a video game or like one. He or she can improve herself in many ways. The most common one, as in most video games, would be by killing monsters or repeating an action over and over again as a form of training. But does that mean that all the novels that are in the genre of video game are also system genre novels? Partially true. All video games genre novels by default have a system at the core, either if the author of the novel is focusing extensively on it or not. But this can make them to belong to the system genre, but partially. A pure system novel is when the MC is the only one having this unique seat-like code tool, and which is called the system. Even if there are other people with the same abilities that the system allows the main character to develop. The difference is the owner of the system can grow in power faster or maybe have no limits in how much he can grow. And while the rest who may have this similar kind of powers do have limits or can only do specific actions that the main character has not been restricting to. So, what is making a system novel different from a cultivation one? Cultivation is something that makes a specific someone to grow in power in almost a natural way, and it is accessible for almost everyone as long as they put the effort and the talent. While the system is, as said before, a cheat kind of tool given to the MC. There can be combination of the two, of both system and cultivation. Example would be the strongest system, but the fundamental difference between the two, to separate them, would be the way the power and the level works. In the case of cultivation, there are many ways to describe the power state of the character, as we had discussed in our previous seminar for cultivation genre. But as far as system genre goes, in most times it is represented with a number, or more specifically, the level of the system's user. So, what does a system need or can have? I'm referring to the system itself, not the genre in general. One of the fundamental things is the stats of the character. Since he became a game-like character, he or she can develop himself in different ways, and there had to be the stats to represent these changes. A few examples of stats would be strength, agility, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, endurance, many more. Just think of any RPG game and you will have your examples. Second one is fostered, in my opinion at least, is something that has been mentioned before, the level of the user. Earning a level can unlock either new function for the user through the system, making his transition or her transition to becoming stronger and possible fulfilling a final goal faster. Finally, an important tool that can be used and needs to be in a system is the AI side of the system. The AI can be just communicating with the MC through notifications, banners, windows of like almost like any notification, any kind of app, or it can have an actual voice of itself that will answer the question and help the main character. Another value would be the class, especially if the MC is in a world where people have already inhuman kind of abilities. Having a class that is unique or too rare can add a layer of this to this character to show the difference between them. Maybe adding something special to this class that others who may have it don't. Finally, you will need, you as an author of a system genre novel, you will need to define what type of special abilities the system allows the main character to learn. There can be different spells, if it is a magic-based world or a magic-based story, different skills, martial art moves, sword styles, and the list going on, depending of the style of your story and your world. So we have learned a little bit about what system is, but how do we make the system novel? How do we begin? First of all, you need to decide how your main character goes to the system. There are multiple ways to progress at it, and of course, this is something that you yourself can put your little detail on. Some usual ways to do that would be either the main character finds an artifact of sort, interacting with it makes him to earn the system. Another option would be for the character to maybe go reincarnated or transmigrated to another world and have the system as a way to increase in power and survive into a new world. So before continuing with the list of what needs, I would like to ask my fellow host if they have any other idea how the main character could learn a system. Maybe something that had happened in their novels, even if they aren't writing a system one. Nagi, any ideas?
Well, funny enough, like I did consider in the past for my novel to move into system. There's a sub point to the whole artifact system. If I remember correctly, it was about in chapter 34 in my novel, where the main character has basically had a near-death experience, but he's had an item or some artifact of life, which he's kept through himself and been trying to cultivate power through to establish a link through the whole time. Since I think like chapter 19 or something, when something drastically happens there. So the way that I was looking at it, and I ended up scrapping the idea, but the way that I looked at it was that it was a form of achievement. The character, my main character, did something that only he could do and only something he had done out of the whole world. And I was establishing a connection with a living being through the crystal core, like the essence core. Which, if from other novels, the idea of a crystal core and an essence core isn't really unique per se. But through him establishing this link with a unique character, which will be this is stolen, but way later on be defined as a protector, of a guardian of the world. Then that guardian will come back to life as his partner, and he would get a system that guardian provides him to then have a cutting edge. Like he's the only one with the system. And the system speaks to him, and as you've introduced before, how the system would work. I ended up scrapping the whole idea of actually doing this because I write a dark psychological fantasy. And I felt that if I went into a system and the basic trope of what a system would provide, it wouldn't be as dark and as gritty and grounded as I would want my novel to be. So that's the only reason to why, if you end up reading my novel when I publish it, that you won't even see any of what I've just mentioned right now. Another way I could see it is a sub thing on the whole reincarnation part is you, instead of you being the one that's being transfigured into a new body, a new world, and everything. There's a subgenre of isekais, like of reincarnations, that I haven't seen much of, but it still interests me, and that's the infusion of another soul in yourself. It's something I read way back in the day, but I still remember to this day, and because of how psychological it was. But the whole idea was that an entity of power, like a soul containing the system and the power thereof, which is the only soul that had that power, transfigured itself into the main character. So it's a dual soul body, where the second soul still had a mind of its own. But through its power and its energy sources, it was the system to him. And slowly, as the two souls were being combined in power to become one, that will be used as the system to then slowly, gradually get stronger until they could be strong enough, like, of equal power to then combine. I don't remember which one it is, but it's basically taking what a classical system could be, but it's spinning it around with, it's not the main character who gets transfigured to the soul, but he's getting something into him instead, in a form of a soul.
Yeah, I think is like people need to understand a little about the difference between what reincarnation is of being transmigrated into one, because in the case of reincarnation, the character is pretty much born into. He starts as a baby, he was conceived and things like that. If you go to a body that already exists, either you take over or been creating into in a dark kind of form, this is transmigration, so it is different things. What about you, Sorin? Do you have any ideas how a system could be earned by a character?
Basically, going off of what Nagi said, I was kind of going with the route he was mentioning at the end there with the dual souls. One of my novels, you're aware of it, is going to be transformed into a system novel sometime after the summer. And I planned on having it be, I did say reincarnation, but as you mentioned, it's more of a transmigration, where he's going to go into an existing person's body, but both souls will exist at the same time. He's just not taking over the body completely, like it happens so often, but both souls will exist.
Yeah,
and then work together to form the system will be formed from that. And yeah, obviously the way the system is going to work in my novel is going to be a little bit different since it revolves around eating bacon. But yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't really have any other ideas to add to it besides, well,
yeah, but this is pretty much, I think, the reason how it happened because it is a start, and this is something that can add to your story even later on, because you can just give, if you go with the artifact kind of thing of the main character founding an artifact, then you have to later starting revealing, okay, how this artifact came to be, who created it, and things like that. So you give you, as an author, a tool to even more increase your story and give a background, maybe not right away, of course, but give a background of how things happened, and maybe that didn't happen by mistake as it appeared in the beginning, but it was meant to do. So there are like a few tools that this more detail can be improved later on. But yeah.
To that, I think the way of an artifact is definitely one of the more popular choices to be taken. Also because it's way easier to implement and abuse in a sense for world building. Talking back to like a novel we talked before we started the seminar, solo leveling. The way that they did it with the system was that the system was purely created to power up and to prepare the soul and body of the main character for someone else to take over.
Yes.
The whole system of like the whole story, like world building story about involved terms when it comes to the system from solo leveling is that there are these different sovereigns where the shadow sovereign, I think it was his name, he needed a new body fitting him so that he could take over and then he could reign as a sovereign of the shadows once more. Where he had then the main character, Song Jian-woo, I think it was, basically passed the basic trial because he had escaped death on the hairbreadth so many times that it fit the viewpoints and how the Shadow Sovereign worked. And then therefore they had a character, I believe was under the name Artisan or something akin to that. They created a system to then power up the main character to have his body prepared for then when the Shadow Sovereign was supposed to take over. Of course, then like the whole story for those who's read it. Yeah. But yeah, like that's definitely one way that like the system is created, only one has it. And it's definitely an aspect of either transmigration, preparing for transmigration and artifact.
Yeah. And a good example of that is like where I think like solo leveling is a good example of in that world there are people who have powers, inhuman powers, like the main character isn't the only one who has something like that, but he pretty much have no limit. He start from level 1, but he can level up, grow in power, while everyone else is pretty much is when they unlock the power, it's like you are that strong, you cannot get stronger. Like it's pretty much either you want the ticket or not. Although I think they mentioned that there are some very rare cases of reawakening, of increasing your power. But yeah, so next in the list of what a system novel would need for you to decide would be to decide what the stats of the system would be, the starting values, and the potential abilities and effects that they would have on the main character when they increase. The main character can start with base value, which can be like the number 10, or have a variety to fit the character. For example, if the character gets a system at a point at his life, so he already was a normal kind of person and somehow he unlocks the system, he may have high intelligence and low strength because he was someone who was always behind the book and didn't have any physical training. So the system is representing those kind of abilities of his own, this kind of personal stats through numbers. I know Nagi and Sorin, both of you have introduced variety of characters, and of course you have your main character, or in the case of someone, main characters. Each of those have like a unique personality, unique kind of powers, unique ways of doing things. So if you have to pick one, what do you think, if they had a system to represent like their stats, what would be those stats? What would be over another? Would be like a lot of strengths, how low intelligence, more kind of dexterity? Nagi?
Yeah, so basically, when it comes to stats in general, it's a very basic aspect of game design. And as a game designer, I know all of that, and also creating unique statistics. So just focusing on that, just going back away from your question a bit. In regards to stats, there's the very basics ones that you mentioned at the very top, like strength, dexterity, agility, intelligence. There can also be wisdom, for example, because there's differences in those.
Yes.
It is always, whenever I hear about it, I always think about Warcraft 3, because there are those very basic stats that he gets. For those who want to write system, I will recommend working in increments of 5, because it looks nice to the eyes when everything is added up by 5 or 10 every time, if you want to keep it to the minimum of them. Or you can just also just do ones and then 0.5, maybe, just if you want to keep your numbers a bit smaller. So definitely for those who want to write system, just look into game development and how stats are being done there, and also calculate it, because you need to accurately represent your statistics and how those are written for your character in the system to how they actually are in the world. Because if you do not do that simple fundamental setting before you even start fighting, what they do action-wise in battle or whatever, it can really put off some readers, because it will seem unrealistic to how you are representing it beforehand with stats. So aside from that, to your question, I have a multitude of different characters, and while I do not have system myself, when I do character building, I actually do think about them stat-wise. Like which parts are they stronger in, and how would their setup and clothes and the armor represent that? While doing concept art for Mikazuki, like Mika, who is my main character, we heavily discussed that he's an agility and dexterity type of person. He is really strong, and his overall stats are quite high, to be honest. Like they're really busted, but there's also the fact that he's not human, that he's a white phantom, which is a species that I've made for my novel. But his general stats would be that if we say, for example, the very basic stats of a farmer will be that intelligence and wisdom. They like intelligence would be a 5, wisdom would be at 0, strength would be at 15 because manual labor. Agility would be 5, and dexterity would be 5. They'll, for example, be an average farmer. Like they are totally weak. They are really stupid, but they're strong because manual labor is an aspect of life, especially in the medieval area where most of them are farmers, so they have some apprenticeship where they work their whole days. In regards to other characters, I have one character who died who was actually really, really, really strong, but the main character does not know that. I won't know for hundreds of chapters. One you have only seen attack once, but the for example, like the killing threat of just his stare alone, for example, has been expressed 3 times, I believe, in the novel. So his strength and agility are the main points that he has, and both of them will be in the few thousands currently. Well, the main character, he's a kid, but him already having killed a variety of still weak monsters, but still really strong monsters compared to everyone else. His agility would be about 320, where his strength would be around 260. Wisdom would be low, but still around 40, given that his manipulation of essence, which is my power system, um, is quite up there. Intelligence will be at 120 because he's a smart kid, and dexterity will be around 170. While the numbers to you might not make sense because again, you haven't read take it as the majority of people here haven't really read far or at all my novel, and the sneak peek that I have on my website. But it should at least give you, compared to farmer's strength that I gave earlier, the image of how strong this kid actually is at his current stage.
What about you, Soren? What do you think? Like one of your main characters could be representing in the stats?
Well, stats would definitely do some other stats besides the core stats, as I would call them. Other things such as, let's see, well, because the elements play such a large factor in my novel, I would definitely add some type of elemental defense or attack type stat, which would be for each element, obviously.
So kind of a resistance against the element, or
yes,
the way to
how strong
manipulate
they are
it.
in each element and how much resistance they have towards it.
How much
because of their
proficient they are to
affinity.
using it.
Right, exactly.
Mm.
So yes, basically just that. You have your normal, your strength, and all that, but that's not as important unless you're a physical weapons type person. Like Zach's, one of my characters, is basically a swordsman. He can use magic, but his proficiency is mainly in the sword. So therefore, his strength and endurance would really take a large effect. There's also basically your mana pool. So that's a very key stat. How much magic you can use before you basically run out, need to rest or recover. So that's something else that I would find to be very important in a system novel.
Yeah, in most cases, like when it comes to mana, maybe you have like the denizens that pretty much like the highest denizens you have, it helps in other things, and it also maybe helps in how much mana you have if you are a mage.
Right. So it's not like they can just fire spell after spell after spell after spell. That would just be horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to have them get worn down. And the way I have it in the Omnimage, which is not a system novel, but it has a very, basically a soft mana pool, where the user, after they use magic for a certain amount of time, the more they use it, they start to deteriorate. Headaches, fatigue, everything. And they just can't go on anymore. So that's how I reach getting to that point in my novel.
So I'm guessing like an important thing, because in your world is, or your novel pretty much is a little more, it is very magic based over there.
Oh, yes.
Like magic is an important factor. Probably like the intelligence is, if it is affecting like the how much mana is an important kind of factor, an important kind of stat.
Yeah, so obviously, I guess you would call it, because I wouldn't really use intelligence to affect magic, which I know is very common in games. I would use the elemental proficiencies instead.
Yes.
Because that would be how you would have to manage it.
Yeah, in most cases it may be like intelligence increases the size of how much mana you have, but how much of its element you're gonna use can be like, yeah, a separate thing.
Exactly. So somebody might have a very large mana pool, but they might specialize in only one element, where they can use another element, but
But
not very well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, continuing with our list, another thing that you need to decide in order to write a system novel is the possible mechanics that the system will have, how the character is going to level up, what he earns by leveling up. Can he do any special action, create tools to help him in doing that? There are some classic mechanics on how to do things, and it is always advisable to try to breaking the mold and add your special touch. I'm gonna give a little example in my second novel that I'm working on, The Boy with the Upload System. Yeah, I know what the title. In the novel, the main character understands that a few of the mechanics of his system, and that by appraising different kind of machines, because it is a sci-fi kind, like future kind of based world novel. So by appraising different kind of type of machines, raise his power and unlocks new faction of the system. So by just adding a simple element, the element of a tuner, and the amount of entries in it, I was able to make somehow original way to help in the improvement of the character, other than just have a lever, which of course he has. The lever is there to adjust part of his abilities, as it is a different path in order to raise it. To feed his tuner, he has to seek different machineries, understand them, and thus we raise the abilities to interact with them and the action that he can get with them through his system. While raising his lever gives him the option to raise his own stats, as the ones we had discussed before, and making him stronger, faster, maybe bury things easier, or maybe help him to persuade others to do things for him easier. So in that way, there are two ways of development, either trying to increase the size of its tuner or level up. And that gives me, as an author, more choices on how to develop and decide in different activities of the main character that we do in order to raise his power, giving me more opportunities to develop the character through those activities. And as not only in the power level of his, but also the possible personality that will start developing as the system can offer you the opportunity to pretty much change your character from how he began when he got the system and as it moves on. Another example for different kind of mechanics, I would say, would be one web novel and the number one currently, at least power ranking of web novel, my vampire system. So the protagonist there is pretty much a vampire, as said in the title, and his stats can increase by drinking different type of blood. The source of the blood has to be of a different person each time, or it won't have any effect on the system itself. So this leads to the main character to get a little creative, because it's not normal to go out seek for blood. So gets a little creative in order to find this blood, and Brobes will do things that he never imagined that he had to do, and leading his personality to change and adapt to his new kind of situation. So Nagi, what kind of mechanic do you think? You said that you were planning, but you haven't followed with this plan of going with a system novel. What kind of mechanic that may be a little more unique than normal would think you would introduce?
Well, I am introducing it somewhat, but it's more of a soft magic aspect of it, like not hard to define as a power leveling from a system would be. Because as I mentioned earlier, Mika, my main character, is a white phantom. white phantoms, contrary to the normal humans, has been cast away from society. They're seen as demons, who are the ones who brought the monsters and the destruction of the world. Basically, being seen by humans as the sole reason to why humanity is on the brink of death. Even though, again, spoilers way late in the future, that's not the case. But still, white phantoms, looks-wise, are quite pale in the skin. They have white hair and they have elongated ears. So in a sense, more elvish design in how they look. The main character, compared to everyone else, is quite unique because I have a trait system. As I mentioned earlier, I have something called essence as a power system. Essence, as described in the novel, is the life of everything. It's the thing that's in the life of the waters and the trees and the humans and everything. And essence can either be given to another, can be taken by killing the vessel that contains the essence, or if it's left standing by itself, wherever if enough essence is covered, it can create its own life. In regards to traits, there are various other traits which people might be familiar with. For example, enhancers, using the power of the essence to enhance parts of their whole body in order to get stronger. There are conjurers, for example, who use their life and impure particles in the air to then, for example, conjure up a fireball. There's also the augmenters who can augment a film of essence around an object, and then maybe add an element to it if they have done enough proper research into how the element is created to then manipulate the essence to create that element. For Mika, the main character, he is basically he's a manipulator, which is seen as the weakest one of them all. He can link his essence with another core of essence and then move it around. It's so weak, in fact, that the strongest manipulator can have 2 small blades and then just make them fly around and nothing else. And they're not really that fast as well. So they are mainly used as a way of doing transport systems. So while it's a medieval world, they are basically laborers who just make sure that the engine, the wheel of the trains, are moving to just transport in the main city. They're not really good for much else. But the main character has learned and adapted to manipulate his own core, his own essence core, so that he can use every trait and every power imaginable, as long as he does the proper research and he understands the basic concept of it. So that's one unique thing that he can do himself. One thing that a system, for example, if I did decide to implement that, could allow him to do. But it's something he's able to do anyways now because, as I said before, it's more soft magic because he has the basic understanding of how to manipulate his core.
What about you, Soren? You said that your second book, pretty much, is going to be a system novel. So have you thought, or are you working on any mechanic that you think may not be close to the classic ones that have been used?
Well, the main mechanic, you're talking specifically for what they're going to use to level up, right?
No, in general, it not being specifically to increase the power, to develop their system. It may not be exactly to level up. It may be to craft different things in unique ways.
For example, what advantage would the system give? Where, for example, other people might have a limit to growth, where then say, for example, the system that the main character is getting removes that limit. If that's the kind of system you're going to have, of course, because there are 2 different ways, as you also mentioned earlier, Shing, of systems, where there's the parts system where everyone has this system, and then they all have to within the same rules of the system, and then the actual system, which, if that's how you call them, where it's only the main character that has the unique advantage the system gives them.
Yes.
Okay. Basically, the way it'll work is I can't talk about it without laughing. because it revolves around eating bacon. Certain individuals, it'll be the other kind of system where it's not just one person. So anyone who becomes a bacon master will have access to the system. So if they are deemed worthy by whatever means, and they are compatible with the system, but so granting them the power to use magic and things like that through eating pork products, more or less. But only those people who have that power will have access to the system. So when the main character eats pork for the first time, he's going to gain access to that system, and it'll obviously be a life-changing event. So that's the advantage is just going to be over normal people. There is no individual advantage. It's just you get whatever power you get, and then you level it up as you go.
The power of eating Danish bacon for the first time.
Danish bacon. Yes, we gotta make sure it's
I
Danish.
think like an example that I can give from my side. Again, it is for the partial thing, and like to make pretty much a mechanic that is breaking the mold from like the usual video game kind of things. Is in my main book I have pretty much there are two people. It is a video game book, so there are the players and the NPCs who pretty much normally would maybe develop the same, just the players could have the help of the system to make the things easier for them. But in my case, I pretty much have two separate ways to represent the power. The players have the usual level up to everything they're doing, like the skills, the different kind of levers, spells they may have, and so on. But for the NPCs, I have ranks who are not numbered in numbers. You start with low rank, then go base rank, master rank, grandmaster, divine, and it pretty much it may be like the same as if the low rank I have pretty much going to be the same as having a player and reach the same skill in the first 10 levels. So at level 10 and at level 11 it counts as being in base rank. But the difference is the NPCs being part of the game, they have some advantages who the players don't have. So even if the players may reach the master rank through having a level that is close to that, they may never get some kind of mechanic that the skill is giving from an NPC who actually has a master rank. So easily that kind of concept, especially if others have a system or a kind of way to represent the power and grow the power, you can, by changing maybe a little how you represent your things, also show a difference on the more power that this representation can be hide behind it. But another mechanic that I need to discuss that could belong in the previous category, but I think it's good to think about it separate and has been discussed before, is about how the MC, the main character, communicates with the system. The most common one would be through window banners appearing with messages in when the character asks the system, or maybe something triggers, like a new quest, leveling up, and things like that. Or there can be the existence of an actually talking AI, or actually talking to the mind of the character. But in the case of that, let's say we have like an AI, it can be just start as almost hearing recorded kind of responses and can only ask for two specific kind of questions, or it can be like actually person speaking to the main character, who one of the option, a very common one, would be maybe the creator of the system if it is something that he unlocked. But having an AI like that, you are given the option to create almost like maybe a teacher-student kind of bond between the system and the main character, and it slowly gives you as an author a tool to slowly start revealing things. As the AI getting access to be able to say more things to the main character when he reaches a certain point, either if it is reaching a specific level, finding an item, or being creative in different ways to use the system. So by doing all of the above and hearing all the above, this is almost like a good start to start the trip in writing a systems and a novel. But is giving answer to the questions that we just discussed is, of course, not just the only way in order to write a complete novel. There are certain ways, and these questions are good to give you a good understanding of how the system will work in your genre, in your novel, which is, of course, an important tool to be used in the development of your novel. And this, as I said before, some of these are like great tools into helping developing your character in the future. But a system may be like an important part of the genre, but this is not the only thing that is to keep your readers active and on the edge and to keep reading your story. Your characters, either if it is your main character or others who he meets, or to help him or play another important role, maybe pick some kind of villain, are also important. It is, you can think of it almost like an online game, and the main character is like a newbie. He needs the help in order to learn things, how they work, and a few people will help him. Some others will get in the way. Some others may not even care that he exists. So new bonds, different kind of bonds being created. Either it's gonna be friendship or hatred, and maybe some other kind of development with the main character that way. So showing the development of your character from before getting the system and later as it move on is an important aspect and of the system general ones, and that is like something that I like about that one, because you can show how a person can change by earning, in a sense, like a power, how this kind of thing can send him to the better or maybe to the worse. As the main character at some point probably would have a goal to reach, either if it is just to become stronger, maybe get a revenge for something, just survive, live a better life, or maybe go for the girl or guy of his dreams or her dreams. But the ultimate goal is, and that ultimate goal, the final goal, is an important factor to the system factions, as you, as a writer, can at any point as you write and go on with the story, you can ask yourself like a simple question: what could help in this situation? And then you come up with possible unlocking a new faction in your system to help in the goal of the character at that point. And that's pretty much what I needed to discuss. We are currently open with questions if anyone is having any.
Yeah, so this is the Q&A section. So the seminar is essentially already finished with what we were going to present about system. Now it is purely just for you guys to ask questions if you have any, where both me, Søren, and Xing will be here to answer whatever you might need answered. So please, if you do have anything at all, but mostly related to the seminar, please do ask away.
Tips resource for keeping track or creating points for stats from level to level. Yeah, it's an important thing to keep the status of your player like as it progresses. And in many books, you may show like what the current status is, what the stats are, or you may keep it hidden. But it's always good to have it written at some point, and as it progresses, even if you don't mention like a change happening, like updating the stat or keeping like different, there are many tools. We had discussed a few in order to keep notes in a previous seminar, and definitely like I think like Scrivener would be a good one, like keeping like different kind of notes organized.
Scrivener will be good for character sheets and general information to keep notes stored and also properly categorized.
Yes.
If, as I mentioned earlier, I would recommend that you heavily focus on how realistic your game design and stats are, in contrary to how it affects the world and how the Power Fox and 1000 actually is, in contrast to how it affects the world and the main character or the other characters that have those stats. As you mentioned, in regards to your question, Excel sheets are really good for calculations and preparing it, because in Excel it uses its own like very visual basic programming for calculations. So you can easily just set it up to when you add a number or if you add a term into your code list, that it will do all the calculations for you. Of course, that would require some proper setup, some proper calculations, and pre-prepared work for you to have all of that set up. But if you definitely do take world building and how realistic and like how many plot holes you don't want to leave in to the calculations of the system, I can definitely recommend that you take the proper time and effort into preparing such a document.
Yeah, and a good thing is for the stats and things like that is either if you mention it in the book or anything like that, what has Nike has mentioned before is pretty much trying, once you decide what stat you're gonna use, okay, but the different, having like some examples of like the number of the stats can represent. Like an example, a farmer may have a strength of 10 or 5, like a guard may have 20, a guard of the king may have 50, and so on and so on. So you can keep like the different kind of examples over there to keep track on them.
Totodile asked, can I make this system a soul of something like a legendary Pokemon or being, but its mortal body died and needed a host to revive? So, yeah, that goes back to something that I mentioned earlier. What defines a system is essentially that it has, hey, I am system. And then, of course, the way that it presents stats, how the stats works and everything. It can be a soul, it can be an artifact, it can be about everything as long as it keeps the very basic parameters of stats and how the system functions and is presented.
Yeah, it can be like something that contains knowledge. Where that knowledge is kept, it's pretty much like different whether it is a soul or an artifact or anything else.
Yeah. Lobster or Lobsky asked, what do you think works better in a fantasy setting? A sentient system or non-sentient one? I
think it's pretty much the way it is a personal kind of thing, the way that you want to progress the story. if you have a sentient one, it is a good way to, as mentioned, to create like a bond of the system and the player, and the not the player, the main character, because like just have a non-sentient one who maybe throws like windows with text, like panels with text. It's like the main character may just get annoyed by it, but it doesn't get closer to it. It doesn't make a relationship with the system if you want to progress like that. But as mentioned, if you have a sentient one, it gives you like an opportunity to reveal things later on easier by having talks with him. So you can create a bond between a master, teacher, student bond between the two of them. So it pretty depends on you, the way that you want to approach, because if you are in a fantasy setting that the main character is his own, just himself, like he maybe like don't trust anyone else or no one else has something to help him, maybe go with the sentient one. If there are others who can help him, maybe developing his skills, both can work. Like there may be others who know how to use magic. So if he himself can use magic, he can get like in a town, in a library, who can teach him, like getting a teacher that can show him a few tricks. So pretty depends on the way that you go for your story. As Shiny has mentioned, balancing stats can be very hard.
Yeah,
That's
that's the reason
why
it's a profession in game development.
yes.
So,
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty much like game designing, and it is pretty much like in most of like developing, there may be like just a guy or a team who is doing that, balancing like how stats work and the different values. So it can be very hard in over that. And most of the times if you try, you, as in my case, try to use something that you are familiar with, especially like there are many examples of video games that you can use, and using one example like that can be used. In my main book, I pretty much use almost like the system as it is in the Dungeons and Dragons, which I am very familiar with, and that's why I've changed quite a few things, how things work there, from there, of course, but a few similarities on how the stats work and anything like that exist.
yeah. Saren, you were saying?
Yeah, I was just going to say it is a very difficult thing. Speaking as somewhat of a novice game developer myself, and also because I designed one for a fellow author who hired me to do it. It was rather fun to do, but creating a stat system, making sure it curves properly. So it goes off of, he had experience, he had all the he had the base stats, and there were other things, different ranks, which also affected the stats. So there was so many things, but balancing that, because I had to balance it through all the levels he wanted me to go up to. And then, of course, as a coder, I naturally went farther than that just to make sure it remained balanced in case he wanted to expand. But that's the kind of stuff you have to think about when you're doing it. Keeping everything balanced as you go. Just don't start off and then just willy-nilly start adding stats here and there. Just like, oh yeah, he did a little bit of that. Let's give him some points there. No, you need to really plan that out, because as any game developer that makes any games that has stats will tell you, you can't just assign stats. You need to actually have
you need to
done properly.
You will need to pretty much to show, like, because the stats are a representation of how stronger he can be. And in most video game kind of thing, I see like people start maybe 10 and then they go to 1,000. Like, but you cannot see like, okay, how much difference there is between them. in like because of that much of agreement, after some point you say, okay, has he really got stronger? And but it's pretty much the way that you are trying to represent them and giving them like a good examples on how things are working, and that can be a hard thing, but there are a lot of examples that you can use in order to make it work. So what about the system?
Yeah, in regards to ephemeralities question, what about those systems with no stats, like the ones that just gives crests and credits, etc.?
Maybe the stats are hidden.
Well, I would argue that if the reward is credits, which is essentially just money, and there's no other rewards such as stat boosts, special items that just pop up from the system, why not just have an adventurer like guild type of system, like governmental system or like intergovernmental system that basically just does that. They have a board with quests and they give you money for doing it. You won't necessarily need a system message in people's head to do that, unless if you want, like for example, just magic and people can talk through telepathy, or if it's more modern world, that phones. But that won't be a system if there's no stats and
just because he has like special kind of powers or things like that he can develop doesn't mean that you have a system.
Yeah.
But yeah, the adventure kit may be something overused, but it pretty much sometimes
it's a classic trope, but it also depends on how it's being used,
and how you introduce
the naming. Yeah, I think it's mostly the naming that's overused because it's basically just an intergovernmental job agency, nothing else. The name for it, yes. The actual use of an adventurers guild might be overused, but it fits in the world settings and also fits in every world basically because people would need it.
Yeah, like a global organization who is behind it and pretty much helps in people become either they are gold adventurers or you of course can give like different kind of titles, like it's also depending your as a novel writer in how to name things.
Yeah, for example, in my novel, I have three different ways of where people can do jobs when they don't do smithing and everything. The focus is purely on manpower. One is an adventurers guild, which is basically just a job agency that, hey, we have these odd jobs that need to be done. We don't have governmental laborers, those who are jobless, essentially. You can do it. For example, just guarding someone, pull the weeds, kill like some monsters that nobody else would do. I got a hunter system, which is basically just a whole military system. And then a dungeon exploring one, which is also a part of the military.
Yeah. So, what if the system is trying to manipulate preparing as a host, and the quests are to manipulate him? Well, an example that Nagi gave, solo laboring, is not manipulating, but the system is preparing him in order to do.
The quest moves him forward to being prepared to use the powers and have the body prepared for the host to actually get into the body. So
yeah,
with no stats again, no stats. It won't really be a system, because system is specifically about the whole. Hey, I'm system. Here's your stats. If you do it without system, it will basically just be a soft magic fantasy or hard magic fantasy, depending on how you describe the magic system. But it is the stats and the game development aspect into that makes it a system. And also, of course, the system speaks.
I have something to bring up. One of my pet peeves about system, which you can go ahead and discuss your views on it, is system screens in system novels.
Okay.
Yeah, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
My distaste for obscenely long system screens and skill screens. So, what are your views on that?
I think, like in my case, because I have a system screen in a status screen, as I call it, in both my books, and I try not to show everything over there. I try pretty much to show only the things that are um, necessary, and I don't try to show them all the time. Pretty sure I have seen others doing of showing only part of the status or the system or of what has changed and not show the whole thing. So when a change happens, it may show like just the stats that have changed, but or just like a panel of when a change happened. But yeah, like I think it's unnecessary of keeping track of everything and showing in your book about everything, especially having something that is not necessary to be there. For example, my character unlocks, in a sense, to the system different kind of languages, but I don't keep track of them like in the status because it isn't like something so important in the development of the character. So they may be necessary to show your status every now and then, but trying not to be try to keep it as low as possible, only what is necessary or you deem necessary, and not pretty much spam it in order to increase your word count.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering that. But yeah, it's just I don't know. Some people actually enjoy that where they see the big long,
Yeah, but I think
almost chapter length.
yeah, if you have like 100 of lines of just the skills over there, it's pretty much like nobody gonna read that. I mean, yes, you want your character to be powerful, but does him have unlocked in pretty much every skill or that there is in the game doesn't mean like he is truly powerful. Just maybe have like a small list, but he has increased them in a high power instead of having like. So he goes for quality, not quantity, but quality.
Yeah, Avida asked, what is your thoughts about systems that can upgrade as the MC gets stronger? I would personally, for every system, have it upgrade with like what windows on what abilities open up for you to use in the system to grow along the character. Having a static system or just anything in the world that's static and never changes is boring, especially if you go for really, really long novel series. Because if it's static, there's no development, and the only thing development is just one linear character who knows everything about the system, and you know everything about the system, so why even continue having the system?
Yeah, it's pretty much.
If it develops, it also helps you develop your character, develop your worlds, and also just develop the story in general. So just keeping it static, in my opinion, would be stupid.
Yeah, pretty much is
So, yeah.
trying to, as mentioned before, try to add new faction as it's going on, as he develops his system, learning new things. Like, don't be like, it's a good thing to do, and not be like, this is what you can do.
Yeah, I love the idea of basically having it maybe locked portions of the system that unlock as the story progresses.
Yeah, that's a great tool to do. Especially if you have a sentient, like a usual one thing that is done, if you have a sentient kind of part of the system, it may be like, I cannot tell you anything more about, maybe there are like mention of specific things that the character mentions, okay, what that is about the sentient, maybe like, I have no access to that information yet, you need to do something, or at some point, like when he's doing something, be like, oh, now you can do that. Or like he learns that he can do something that may be unlocked all along, but he just hadn't tried to use it that way. So thank you everyone for joining once more to today's seminar. I hope it has been quite helpful as always, and probably like a lot of people are hearing that in the Spotify and the different kind of platforms that we are uploading, and you should join, for the ones who hadn't, our Discord server, and we are trying to be helpful either with those seminars or different kind of ways, just by chatting. And as said in the beginning, we are here to help beginners and non-beginners to do the work better and better and better, and learn through what we have done, what we have learned, and what we have discussed with others. Thanks everyone for once more being here, and have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Take care.